What part of illegal don't you understand? They imply that they, in fact, understand everything about it. They take illegality to be self-evident. There's a law, you break the law, that's illegal. Obvious, right? Actually, illegality is a lot more complicated than that. Laws are made and enforced by humans, in historical contexts, and for reasons. They change over time, and they are often created and modified to serve the interests of some groups, generally the powerful and privileged, over others. Most of the citizens who brag that their ancestors came here the right way are making assumptions based on ignorance. They assume that their ancestors went through the process and obtained visas as people are required to do today. In fact, most of them came before any legal process existed, before the concept of illegality existed. The invention of illegality. Illegality, as we know it today, came into existence after 1965. In the decades before 1965, the media rarely depicted immigration in negative terms, nor did the public or Congress consider it a problem in need of legislation. By the 1970s, though, the demonization of immigrants, in particular Mexican and other Latino immigrants, and the issue of illegal immigration were turning into hot-button issues. There are some particular historical reasons for these changes. Some are economic. The global and the domestic economies underwent some fundamental structural changes in the late 20th century, changes we sometimes refer to as globalization. Some analysts argued that globalization was making the world flat, and that with the spread of connection, technology, and communication, old inequalities would melt away. Others believed that new inequalities were becoming entrenched, that a global apartheid being imposed, separating the global north from the global south, the rich from the poor, the winners in the new global economy from the losers. I'll go more into depth about these changes and show how they contributed to a need for illegality to sustain the new world order. The second set of changes is ideological and cultural. Like the big economic shifts, ideological and cultural changes are a process. They can't necessarily be pinpointed to a particular date or year. I use 1965 as a convenience because that's when some major changes were enacted in U.S. immigration law that contributed to creating illegality. But those changes responded to and contributed to the more long-term economic and ideological shifts that were occurring. In the cultural realm, overt racism was going out of fashion. Civil rights movements at home and anti-colonial movements abroad undercut the legitimacy of racial exclusion and discrimination. While apartheid continued in South Africa through the 1980s, even that lost its international legitimacy. In the United States, the Jim Crow regime was dismantled, and new laws and programs were aimed at creating racial equality, at least on paper. By the new century, people were beginning to talk about the United States as a post-racial society. At the same time, though, new laws hardened immigration regimes and discrimination against immigrants in the United States and elsewhere. True refugees of the border wars. Before deeply delving into the dizzying and sometimes irrational nature of immigration law, it's helpful to consider what's actually happening on the ground. I had the opportunity to see firsthand the human tragedy that's resulted from the new immigration regime in March 2010, when I participated in a week-long humanitarian delegation with the organization No More Deaths, one of several that take direct action on the U.S.-Mexico border. Volunteers from these organizations attempt to provide humanitarian aid to migrants by leaving water at stations along migrant trails and offering basic first aid at camps in the desert, among other things. My group, though, was taking testimonies on the Mexican side of the border from migrants who had been caught and deported. During that week,